The other thing about Cisco that you need to understand and why I have a reserve on recommending particular Cisco products because of their history. Cisco has a lot of misdirection, a lot of misfocus, which they have done over the years. When you talk about Cisco in the very beginning, they are a router and switch company. They did routers, they did switches. They were awesome at it. They work. I remember we had Cisco 2500 series routers. These were really, really old. But we used to deploy them and they just ran. We didn't have to touch them. We just have to, the uptime is always very, very high. It just works. Cisco was very dominant when it came to routing and switching. Routing and switching, they were superior. But Cisco started to do a lot of acquisitions, started to acquire a lot of different companies. Cisco's doing big things, right? But that gave a lot of pushback, a lot of misdirection, and they lost their focus. One guy that I talked to who used to work at Cisco, he made the comment that Cisco has lost their soul. And the reason of that is their misdirection and their lack of focus over the years with introducing new products and removing them in such a short time. So let me provide you guys several examples that will illustrate this misdirection and lack of focus that I'm talking about. The first product is a consumer product. And when I first read about it, I was excited. Yet I knew it would not catch on with the public. This Cisco product was called Telepresence Umi, and this is what this product looked like. This included a set-top type of a device and a camera that would connect to any high-definition television set. Now, if you are not familiar with Telepresence, it is a solution that provides an immersive video conferencing solution. And it is typically aimed for very, very large companies. The equipment and infrastructure required is very expensive for most large, medium, and SMB networks, unless employees do a lot of travel to different cities or countries. Anyhow, I was initially excited about Telepresence Umi because it gave a possible affordable alternative of video conferencing for some large, medium, and SMB sized companies. But it was targeted for the consumer market. Hence, I knew it would not be successful. Telepresence Umi can basically provide high-def video conferencing over the internet. But in order to use Telepresence Umi, each participant needed to have this box and camera setup. And the cost for each kit was $500, which means that if I wanted to do a video call with my mother, we both would need this equipment costing $1,000, plus there was a monthly subscription cost to use the Telepresence Umi service. Well, the cost was very high, and with products like Skype, which allows for free high-definition video conferencing over the internet, getting this product did not make any sense for any consumer because, once again, Skype is free. Well, the price for each unit over time was later lowered to $250, I remember. But that still isn't good enough because there are better affordable options that are free. The bottom line, the Telepresence Umi product no longer exists, and it is a clear indicator that Cisco does not understand the consumer market, which is different from the usual customers that purchase Cisco hardware, which is typically medium and large size companies. There are other products by Cisco that has had a lot of misdirection over the years, and that is with the Cisco Small Business product line. This product line was aimed for small and SMB sized companies, including to compete against similar companies in the same market space. That would be Netgear, HP, and Dell, among others. One of these products was the Cisco ISA 500 series, and this was a security firewall appliance. This was aimed to compete against firewalls like SonicWall in the SMB market. I actually liked this product initially as it had a great user interface compared to the SonicWall. However, firmware updates and hotfixes were never released in a timely manner. It usually took months. For example, when the Heartbleed vulnerability was announced, the ISA 500 was exposed to this threat that anyone could do if they had the right tools. It took over a month before a fix became available. But that is strange since this is a security appliance that provides security, but it was exposed to a known virus that could compromise a small business network. Long story short, Cisco later discontinued this product line within a year. The same thing happened for a small business access point, which was very unreliable, especially with its AP-to-AP roaming capabilities for a wireless client. This product also does not exist anymore. There was also a security appliance called the Spam and Virus Blocker that was aimed for SMB companies. I really love this product a lot, and my SMB size customers also agreed. It provided an affordable solution to SMB networks to do spam and virus filtering on their network. Even the user interface was fantastic. However, this product was discontinued by Cisco, and its recommended replacement was the Iron Port, which is too expensive for the SMB size companies. So that is not a replacement model. Another SMB product that I and several other engineers fell in love with is the UC500 series. This was a turnkey appliance that was a router, a switch, a firewall, a wireless access point, a phone system, with even voicemail capabilities, all on the same box. Now, this caught on by a lot of engineers, but there were problems that very quickly emerged. The UC500 did not have an intuitive GUI interface. Now, the command line interface was fine, but having a clean web interface like the other firewalls or phone systems did not exist with this model. Plus, there were concerns with the pricing as a whole solution because of the phones. The phones were just too expensive. Well, Cisco later released cheaper phones to combat this problem, but the phones were limited in what a basic user may require, which meant they usually got the more expensive phone because of their very basic requirements. The bottom line with the UC500 series is that this also, over time, became discontinued by Cisco, and the recommended replacement was the Cisco Unified Communication Manager Business Edition appliance. This also had a very high price point that was not aimed for the intended business size of the UC500. Now, the only small business product line that still has legs today are the Layer 2 and Layer 3 switches. Now, their GUI interface is okay, and they do have their own problems. But the bottom line is that the small business switches are nothing compared to the Cisco Catalyst and Nexus switches by a long shot. I guess you get what you pay for. But these missteps with the Cisco small business product line is why I never recommend any of these products to any of my few small and SMB clients that I have. They are simply not reliable, and they will likely won't even last a year before they become discontinued. Let's move on, and there is so much more. So I mentioned this before in the SDN episode for Ask the Network Engineer, and that is with the Cisco Catalyst 6500 series. And there was a new robust iOS that was introduced called Modular iOS, which allowed the iOS to be crafted into individual services that could be controlled. This means that I could stop or restart a service like routing or TCP or FTP without needing to reboot the entire switch if there was a problem. Well, I deployed this for some of our data center switches years ago, but modular iOS is something that no longer exists as it was quietly phased out by Cisco. Cisco several years ago had a suite of NMS software called Cisco Works that had a lot of different products doing different things of how the network can be managed. Now, the entire Cisco Works ecosystem has gone through several changes and updates, which became very confusing for network engineers for what Cisco Works can do and getting them to work all together, etc. Long story short, Cisco Works does not exist anymore, and it is something that Cisco no longer recommends to their own customers. Next, we get to Cisco's load balancing product. Now, one of Cisco's earlier load balancing products, actually, their first load balancing product was called Local Director. What a disaster. What I'm talking about now is years after that, there was a earlier load balancing product that was called the Cisco CSS. And I actually deployed these products for an online banking network at the time. Now, the operating system was very different because the CSS product line came from a Cisco acquisition. It also supported many other things like SSL acceleration modules that could be used. There were some small issues with the appliance, but they did work fairly well. However, the Cisco CSS load balancers were discontinued and eventually replaced with the Cisco ACE appliance. But before the ACE appliance was even introduced, load balancing was still dominated by F5 and the Big IP, which remains a dominant player in the market. So it has a very, very minimal use of people using those products on their networks to load balance servers. The last example that I will share is probably the biggest of them all in my professional experience, and that is with the licensing model for Cisco Unified Communications. So where do I begin with this? Well, in the beginning, Cisco's phone system product was called Cisco Call Manager. I remember working with Cisco Call Manager starting with version 4. It was a fantastic version for so many different reasons. And the main reason was there was no licensing model. You basically install Cisco Call Manager, you input a product key, like what you would do for Microsoft Windows or Office, and you got a full-blown phone system. You could use any IP phone, and it could be enabled for any phone service like Extension Mobility, among others. And depending on the server hardware, it was recommended to have up to about 2,500 phones registered per Cisco Call Manager node or server. So Call Manager 4 made everything nice and easy to manage. A lot of voice engineers love Cisco Call Manager 4. There was no extra loops to go through. However, when version 5 came, everything drastically changed. So Cisco Call Manager was renamed to Cisco Unified Communications Manager, or Cisco Unified CM, or Cisco UCM. But configuring Cisco UCM 5 was the same as Call Manager 4, which was a good thing. But it also added some additional features, which were good. However, it did introduce a new type of licensing model, which involved installing device licenses. This means based on the phones that you add to your network, the more device units or DLUs were required. So for more advanced phones, more sophisticated, fancier phones, I guess, the more DLUs were required, increasing the overall cost for the Cisco phone system and bringing in more complexity compared to Cisco Call Manager 4. There was also a node license that was required, and I personally remembered that trying to find the part number for a node license for Call Manager 5 or version 6, 7, 8 was something that was not visible on the Cisco website, which did not make any sense. Well, this licensing approach continued on through version 6 to version 7 and 8. In version 9, the licensing model changed and now started to license based on the type of unified communication features that would be used by an IP phone, the number of phones that could be shared by a single user, to even the type of phone that is used, making the process for managing Cisco UCM even more complicated, even for Cisco engineers. Now, version 9 also introduced a dedicated license server or subsystem called the Enterprise License Manager, or ELM, to handle basically the licensing aspects. Well, in version 10, the license server changed again. Within one version. Now it was called the Cisco Prime License Manager, with some minor improvements to simplify the licensing model, because that has been the biggest complaint with the Cisco Unified Communication products. Voice engineers, network engineers, architects were going to Cisco saying, you are making this more complicated than what it needs to be. So Cisco has been trying to fix and eradicate this particular problem for years. Now, I did not even mention the fact that if you want to migrate from one version to another using different licensing models, the ordering process is a nightmare. Plus, the actual process to migrate can be very confusing and frustrating, requiring a lot of support and a ton of baby steps to slowly get where you need to be. I personally remember doing a project for one client in San Francisco that we migrated their Cisco Call Manager cluster, their Cisco UCM cluster, running version 6 to version 9. And that was not a fun experience. It was something that involved a lot of little things that were very questionable. Now, version 11 still introduces the same licensing structure and the Cisco Prime License Manager subsystem or license server. Now, I haven't heard of any plans for any major overhaul of the Cisco UC licensing structure, but I can say this. I really miss the Call Manager 4 days where there was no confusion, limitations, or complexities of the licensing model or additional costs to the customer. And there is more, but those are the major highlights to illustrate the concerns that I am talking about. So, what can you take away from this and what I've been describing here about product misdirections by Cisco? Well, as I said before, you need to build and manage each network as a network solution, not as a Cisco solution. You need to determine the requirements and pick the best hardware based on the requirements, but also what is stable and reliable, choosing a company that has some maturity. But also, don't pick hardware just because it's Cisco or any other particular vendor for that matter. For example, when I was working for a laboratory for the Department of Energy, they were considering a network and mission control, NAC, a NAC security solution by Concentric. It's a company. And I was looking more into what Cisco was doing for NAC. And their product at the time was called Clean Access. There were a lot of parts about it that I did like, which is why I was thinking that it was a better product. But Cisco's Clean Access, there were a lot of concerns with their offering, as I felt it wasn't really ready for prime time. It wasn't ready for any large-scale deployment like DOE. It was more in the development stages, to be honest. But my concern with Concentric was that it was too new of a product and it did not have much maturity in the security marketplace. Well, the laboratory purchased a lot of hardware from Concentric and started doing the rollout of it. And in a short period of time, the product and the company itself went out of business. So they had a lot of hardware basically collecting dust that they can never deploy. Now, Cisco is large enough to recover from their misdirections and continue on, but it can still be expensive plus time consuming for the customer with a very fixed budget. Anyhow, that is what I want to share with you guys and what to be aware of as network engineers in the field. You want to kind of do your research. You want to kind of figure out, once again, from those requirements, what is the best hardware? Which one is the leader in that particular field? Is it, based on security or optimization, routing and switching, voice or wireless? You want to determine who are the leaders. And that basically means what kind of maturity do they have? And when I say maturity, this means a company that has invested a lot of resources in terms of perfecting a product that is very reliable, flexible, scalable, that has security aspects to it, and that people actually are buying and using and implementing on their network. These are things you want to kind of keep in mind. So some of these products that I've been talking to you about, whether it's small business products or some of the enterprise product components like the Modular iOS or the load balancing products, those are products that did not have much maturity, which is why they eventually were discontinued. You want to keep those factors in mind when you're choosing hardware, because you don't want to buy hardware and deploy it for your company, and over time you lose support for it. That's going to make a company very upset because now they have hardware that has no support, no value, no anything, and they can't even get rid of the equipment. So you want to make sure you figure out the best approach of what the hardware should be for the network. And very quickly, before I conclude this video, I want to make a very quick announcement, which is pretty cool actually though. So on my spare time or on my personal time, I make these videos for you guys, but I also do software development. So I do Python programming, and actually one of the big projects that I'm working on now is a kind of a software defined networking and SDN project using Python programming, which is pretty cool. It's a big project, but I'm working on that. But I also do Apple iOS development. Basically, I have 2 apps available right now on the App Store, and I'll do a separate video and talk more about those apps. But I made a quiz-based app called Virtual Network Engineer, and I made a very simple game called Circle Falls. So a lot of people ask me, well, how did you learn this particular programming? Well, for the Apple iOS, I learned how to do those games, those exact applications from a particular YouTube channel, which is by the Architect website. His name is Jared Davison. He's a high school student, and he is fantastic. He very clearly, very simple steps explains how to deploy various components of an app. And he gives many great examples. Because there are a lot of channels or videos on YouTube, which is pretty confusing if you're starting out with Apple iOS development. But Jared Davison has been doing a lot of great things. His channel is definitely growing with the subscribers. And greatly, I was mentioned in one of his videos. He wanted to do an outro for one of his videos, and I was featured in that video. So check out that video, depending on where I put it within my video editing. So go ahead and check that out, but also check out his channel if you are interested in doing Apple iOS development, because I made those apps mainly from learning from his channel, the Architect website. So I tell people, check that out. It's definitely a good place to get started. And we are done with this episode. So thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel and also check out our practical training videos on our main website at routehub.net. And I'll see you guys next time.